When God is ready to give you a new level of experience with him, it comes with a test. Now, the bad news of a test is that it's a test. The good news of a test is that it's preparation for a higher level. And you can really know when God is ready to really move you to the next level, because it will be a final exam. In other words, it'll be a major test. Now, we get minor tests, little pop quizzes along the way. But then everybody gets hit with that whopper. That test that seems like it'll knock you over. It's a major exam, because God is ready to move you to a major level. So today we want to look at the test of faith. Abraham's final exam. The author of Hebrews tells us that it came when God asked Abraham to offer up Isaac, which took place in Genesis chapter 22. So what he talks about in Hebrews 11 actually took place in Genesis 22, this final exam. He is told to offer up Isaac, who was the promise. So here's when you know it's a major test, because you're getting ready to have a major promotion to a whole nother level. You know it's a major test when it calls for something significant in your life and at the very same time makes absolutely no sense at all. In Genesis chapter 22, where the story is unfolded for us in that chapter in detail, God tells Abraham these words. He says to Abraham in Genesis chapter 22, now it came about, verse 1, after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. And he said, take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountain of which I will tell you. That made no sense. How do you worship God when God is doing a number on you? How do you worship God when he has disappointed you? How do you worship God and go to the altar when you believe he has failed you? God, how do I go to church today? It says, I don't feel like worshiping today. Not in light of what you're asking of me, demanding of me, instructing me, calling me to do. Because what you are asking is too deep. But it says Abraham got up. There's another thing you need to observe. It says, get up and go to the mountain, to the place I will show you. He had to obey without all the details. I will only give you more details when I see you moving. See, one of the reasons that we do not see more details from God is he can't get us to move from where we are. Faith is measured by movement. If there is no movement, there is no faith, no matter how faith-ish you feel. So it says Abraham got up. And now the plot thickens. When he gets up, I want you to keep this verse in mind, verse 4. I'm just going to read it right now. We're going to pick it up in a minute. Verse 4 says, on the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Let me read verse 4 again. Verse 4 says, on the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Somebody say third day. On the third day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. He tells the young men, the servants who help carry the load, y'all stay here. I and the lad will go up and we will worship and return to you. Oh, wait a minute now. Abe, God just told you to go kill him. Abe tells the boys, I'm going up here to worship. You boys stay here. Me and Isaac, we're going up here to worship. And when we finish our church service, me and the lad will come back. Oh, wait a minute now. God just told you to kill him. Y'all stay here. I'm going up here, take care of what God told me to do. And when I finish what God told me to do, me and the boy will see you afterwards. But God told you to kill him. So what you mean? We coming back to see you afterwards. See, when you're called to faith, you got to speak the truth in the midst of the contradiction of the circumstance. Hebrews 11 says the reason he said that was because he believed God was even able to raise the dead. That's what Hebrews 11 says. So if I obey you, God, and do what you told me to do, and at the same time believe your promise that you're going to work through Isaac to make a great nation, then I also have to believe, since you don't contradict yourself, that if I do what you tell me to do, you got some kind of miracle you're planning to bring me and this boy back here again. But what made him speak that? Where did this faith confidence come that God could raise the dead? Well, you recall, Sarah's womb was dead. And Abraham couldn't function no more at 100 years old. And God created a hookup. And the miracle baby of Isaac was born. He had seen what God could do in raising a womb. So he figured the same God could raise a son. So when God calls you to a major exam, don't forget what he did in the quizzes. Don't forget what he did yesterday when he moves you to a bigger challenge tomorrow. Because if it's bigger today than what he did yesterday, it's because he's moving you to a new grade level, a higher experience with him. And so they make their way to the place that God said. So Abraham now is talking to Isaac. Isaac says to his father, my father, verse 7 of Genesis 22, here I am, my son. He said, behold, I see the fire, I see the wood, but I don't see the lamb. Every other time we went to church, we had a sacrifice. But today, you ain't bring a lamb. What's up, Dad? Dad looks at his son, can't say anything. You know what he says? He says, son, God's got to fix this one. The Lord will provide himself, because I don't have an answer for you. I don't know how this is going to work out. And when God puts you in a final exam, you don't know how this is going to work out. God has got to do something here, because only God has an answer to this dilemma of faith that I'm in. Because this is a midterm or a final. This is not a little pop quiz, and it's confusing. And God's got to provide the solution. And so he takes his son up. He puts him on the altar. Verse 9, he built an altar, arranged the wood, bound his son Isaac, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Can you imagine what he's thinking, feeling? And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Because guess what? That was what he was told to do. Verse 11, but the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, that's Jesus in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord, Abraham, Abraham. Whenever God calls your name twice. See, when he told him to obey, he only called his name once in verse 1, Abraham. But now in the middle of his crisis, he calls his name twice That means there's something special coming down the pike. Abraham, Abraham, and he said, here I am. Do not, verse 12, stretch your hand out against the lad and do nothing to him, for now I know you fear me, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Now, I don't know about you, but you should be having a problem right now, and it ought to be a theological problem, because God says, now I know. Oh, wait a minute, you God. You're omniscient. Omniscient means all-knowing. You already knew what I would do, because you're God. You know yesterday, you know today, and you got prophecy down. You know tomorrow. You know where I came from, you know where I am, you know where I'm going. What do you mean you only know this now? And you're an all-knowing God. Come on, with your knowledge base, I could have stayed in bed. We could have skipped all this because you already know. But that's not what God says. He says, now I know, as though I didn't know before. Because I know it, I'm knowing it now. And I only know it now because of what you just did. So how do we theologically bring together the concept of an all-knowing God and a not knowing something till now? How does that work? Well, I want to share with you today something God does not know. While God knows everything actual and everything potential, he does not know everything experiential. For example, if you were to ask God, what does it feel like to commit a sin? I suggest to you he couldn't answer that question because he's never done it. The reason why God became a man in the person of Jesus Christ, according to the book of Hebrews, is that God became a man in the person of Jesus Christ so he could sympathize with our weaknesses, so he could feel what we go through. The Father knows what you go through. Jesus can feel it. So Jesus the Son can explain to God the Father, who already knows the information, what the information feels like, because he became a man. So what then is being said to Abraham at this moment? He is saying, Abraham, now I know you love me because I see it and feel it. In other words, you have now given me the experience of your love, not merely the verbalization of it. Sacrifice your son, the son whom you love, your only begotten son. Do you love me more than him? That's a final exam. When God calls forth a faith act of love so he can feel it. Now I know. Oh yeah, informationally, yes. Intellectually, yeah. But today I feel your love. And I feel it because of your choice of me over the thing you love most in life. What is your Isaac? That thing that God can't have because you're too attached to it. And God says, bring it here. We're talking about the test of faith, and we're not talking about a pop quiz now. We're talking about a final exam. Now I know. And there we have it. Watch this. Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, verse 13, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it will be provided. That's one of the great names of God in Scripture, Jehovah Jireh. Let me talk to you about the word Jireh, provide. The Hebrew word Jireh means to see beforehand. That's a literal translation of Jireh, to see beforehand. What you get to see in his provision, you get to see it because of what he's already seen in his prevision. So he precedes what you're going to be provided. What you're provided over here when he comes through, he's already seen over here before you get to it. So while Abraham is coming up one side of the mountain, a ram is coming up another side of the mountain. God precedes before he provides. But what he provides, he's already preceded. So you're going to be the surprise one, and not him, because when you're shocked by what he provides, it's only going to come because of what he's preceded. This is the quietest rams in the history of rams caught in a thicket. When a ram is caught in a thicket, it's moving and jerking to get out of being caught. This is the quietest ram in history. The ram is in the vicinity of the sacrifice because it says he looks up and saw the ram. So God keeps the provision quiet, even though he has already made prevision in advance, because he's seen beforehand what he's going to do that you don't see yet. The question, when you face this trial, is how can I move from God's prevision and get a hold of my provision? Until he completed his obedience, prevision didn't become provision. Whatever God is going to do in your life and circumstance, he has already preceded, but you won't see it provided until you have completed what he's asked you to do. Most Christians are part-time saints. They'll do a little something, something and wonder why God hadn't come through yet. But the question is, have you finished what he's asked you to do? So if you take 50 years to finish it, it may take 50 years for you to see his provision. If you delay obedience, you delay prevision becoming provision. And in James 2, when it talks about faith, it says, by faith, Abraham was justified by works when he offered up Isaac, and he was called a friend of God because he was willing to believe God against the backdrop of the ridiculous. God says to him, verse 15 of Genesis 22, then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you. I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. He says, Abraham, I got it now. I got it. Because you've obeyed my voice in the final, in this tough thing I've asked you to do, I got it from here. I'm going to swear by it. The good news here is that Abraham has had failures in his past. He's blown it a few times over these 25 plus years. God just gave him retesting. Some of us are here today and we've been retesting. God says, I'll wait till you pass. Because I want to give you an experience with me. You want the provision. I want the experience. Give me the experience of your commitment and I'll show you what I can do with rams caught in the thicket, waiting to move when I tell it to. But that raises a question. On this journey of faith, you're struggling, you're walking with your Isaac, you're holding Isaac's hand. You're holding that situation by the hand and God is telling you to kill it even though you love it. And you're walking, how do you make it? How do I make it? Because I don't know when God's going to do it. I don't know how God's going to do it. I don't know how am I going to make it? Remember verse 4? It says on the third day, Abraham looked up and he saw the place. In St. John chapter 8, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees. And Jesus is telling them who he is. And Jesus is talking about the fact that he is the Son of God. And the Pharisees are looking at him like he's crazy and saying, you aren't even 50 years old, they say. You aren't even 50 years old. And you're talking about Abraham like you know him. You're not even 50 years old. What are you talking about Abraham? And Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. That's the Old Testament name for God. Moses said, who shall I tell you sent me? He said, you tell him I am sent you. That's the name for Yahweh. So Jesus says, before Abraham was, I was God. Okay? In fact, Jesus goes on to say, in the last few verses of John chapter 8, he says, watch this, Abraham saw my day and was glad. Genesis 22 verse 4. Abraham is on his way to Mount Moriah. And he looks in the distance and he sees something. Jesus in the New Testament tells us what Abraham in the Old Testament saw. Jesus said, Abraham saw my day. What day did Abraham see? Let me tell you a little secret. Mount Moriah is located a few hundred yards from Mount Calvary. There are just a few hundred yards that separate Mount Moriah from the hill of Golgotha. Jesus said, Abraham saw my day, and he smiled. So Abraham is walking to kill his son, looks up and goes, yeah. He says, Abraham focused on me. And while he kept his eyes focused on me, that's why Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2 says, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of your faith. It says, while you're on your journey, in your final exam, keep your eyes on Jesus. Because if you'll focus on Jesus, he'll get you up the mountain of your exam until you pass the test. Don't look at people, they'll discourage you. Don't look at circumstances, they'll flip the script. He says, keep your eyes on Jesus as you obey God, because when you keep your eyes on Jesus, he will sustain your faith until you reach the finish line of your test. When you're in doubt, look at Jesus. When you're afraid, look at Jesus. When you're unsure, look at Jesus. When you're tempted, look at Jesus. When you failed, look at Jesus. When you're frustrated, look at Jesus. When you don't think you can make it, look at Jesus. Keep looking at Jesus, because if Abraham could look at him in the Old Testament and he hadn't even come yet, how much more should you and I look at him now that he's come, died, and arose, and it all happened on day number 3. We're introduced to Naaman in verse 1 of 2 Kings 5, where we read, now Naaman, captain of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man with his master, highly respected. Because of him, the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man was also a valiant warrior, but he was a leper. This man's resume was impeccable. Everything about him said success. Like a 5-star general, he led the army, and he was very successful in battle. They viewed him as a great man. He was highly regarded in society. It says, but he was a leper. Leprosy in biblical days was a skin disease. It was a disease of the skin that slowly spread, bringing about lesions, sores, and ultimately deformity and death. For leprosy was an incurable disease. In spite of his education, he's a leper. In spite of his notoriety, he's a leper. In spite of his financial success, he's a leper. In spite of rewards, plaques, accolades, and recognition, he's a leper. Because leprosy affected all of you, things are popping out on your skin, they're eating your skin away. Slowly and surely, you know something's wrong with him. It not only affected Naaman physically because of the breakouts all over his skin that was eating his flesh alive, it affected him relationally because leprosy was a communicable disease. It was contagious. So if you got too close to him, you could catch it. And so you were, as the disease progressed, you had to stay away from him so you would not also become a leper. That meant he couldn't interact normally with his family or friends. After a while, it would be too dangerous. And that's why you even see in the Mosaic Law, when a person with leprosy came around, they were told to say, unclean, unclean. They were castaways after a point because they were dangerous. This man was a leper. Something so wrong that it messed up everything that was so right. And there was no cure. It was incurable. So he is both simultaneously a captain, a conqueror, and a castaway. Most importantly, leprosy is tied to something going wrong spiritually. This man, with everything right, has one thing wrong, messing up all that is right. What is your leprosy? What is that one thing in your life that is messing up all the good stuff going for you? Maybe you're successful in your career or with your finances or with your educational achievements. Maybe you can hand out a resume that is impressive, but there's that one thing that you dare not put on it. Because it's just messing you up. It's keeping you up at night. You cannot function like you should be able to function. Because there is this leprosy, this incurable situation you can't fix. That was Naaman's reality. That was his scenario. He had the but phrase, but he was a leper, the footnote on his life, affecting everything. Well, we're told in verse 2 that in one of his battles, he captured a little slave girl. The slave girl from Israel went to Naaman's wife, her mistress, verse 3, and says, I wish that my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, then he would cure him of his leprosy. She told Naaman's wife, if we could get your husband, my boss, down to Israel to the prophet Elisha, I believe Elisha could change his leprosy situation. She was a little girl. She was a nobody in terms of her position in life and her age in life, but she knew somebody. She had a hookup and a connection that could change this man's world and this man's life. So Naaman goes to his boss, the king, and says, this little girl told my wife, who told me that I may be able to get my problem solved by the prophet in Israel. So the king, watch this, the king of Aram, verse 5 says, go now, and I'm going to send a letter to the king of Israel. He departed, he took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 changes of clothes, brought them to the king of Israel. And he says, I've sent Naaman my servant, verse 6, to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy. Well, wait a minute. That's not what the little girl said. The little girl said, there's a prophet in Israel that can cure his leprosy. The problem is, Naaman went to the federal government. Naaman went to the king and says, King, government, I hear there's a solution in Israel. What you think? The government said, king said, I'm going to give you some money, and we're going to throw a budgetary solution to the problem. We're going to fund your deliverance. And so she gave him over $1 million, if you would put it in today's dollars, 10 changes of clothes, and we're going to buy your solution. You better have somebody in your life. They may not have name and they may not have notoriety. A little slave girl who knows somebody who knows somebody who is able to bring you to a divine deliverance, because we've already said leprosy was incurable. If he could have fixed it, it would have been fixed. If you could have fixed it, it would have been fixed. So he uses power, government. He uses money to solve the problem. So the king sends to the king of Israel and tells the king of Israel, I'm paying you off to fix my captain's problem. How does the king of Israel respond? Verse 7, when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and said, am I God to kill and make alive, because it was a life and death sentence, leprosy, that this man is sending word for me to cure a man of his leprosy? But consider now and see how he is seeking a quarrel against me. While Elijah hears about the king tearing his clothes, because Naaman went to the king at the instruction of his master, because his master is listening or has the wrong approach. And Elijah tells the king of Israel, send Naaman to me. Send him to me. Okay, so now it's going to get gooder. I mean, it's real good. Verse 9, so Naaman came with his horses and his chariots and stood at the house of Elisha. He knocks on Elisha's door. Verse 10, Elisha sent a messenger, but Naaman was furious, ticked off, mad, and went away and said, behold, I thought, I'm coming back to that, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand, hocus pocus, over the place and cure the leprosy. The end of verse verse 12 says, he went away in a rage. Because he said, are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? Turned away, ticked off. I am not just Naaman, I'm Captain Naaman. Elijah, you don't know who you're dealing with here. So, he says, there are two rivers in Damascus. Verse 12. They got these two rivers in Damascus, and they got clean water. Wait a minute, Naaman, let's get something straight. Didn't you come here because you dirty? I mean, you got all this pus coming out your skin. You got all these sores on under the skin. You came here because you dirty. So watch this. The reason why Naaman had issues with the Jordan is because he didn't understand the Jordan. See, for him, it was a dirty river. But for Elisha, it was the place where God did miracles. It was Joshua with the priest stepping in the Jordan that let the folk flow over on dry land. It was Elijah and Elisha at the Jordan where miracles took place. If he only understood the Jordan, then he would have seen more than mud and more than dirt. He would have seen that's the place where God shows off. But see, if you don't know where God shows up, you're going to bring your education. You're going to bring what your professors say and think. You're going to bring what the world's perspective is. Well, if it was that good, you wouldn't be incurable. It would have been dealt with a long time ago. Yeah, God lets us be in situations that no man can fix, so that you got to deal with him on his terms. So his servant comes to him and says, verse 13, my father, had the prophet told you to do some great thing, give him another million, give him this, give him that, would you not have done it? How much more than when he says, go wash and be clean? If he'd have given you something hard, you'd have gladly gone and done it. He'd give you something easy, and now you're going to fuss and cuss and get mad at the prophet. So, verse 14, he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan. Watch this, according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child. And he was clean. Don't let your dignity keep you from solving your problem. Until obedience has been completed, you cannot expect a supernatural incursion into your circumstances to calm it, correct it, and reverse it to whatever level the sovereign will of God will allow for. What you and I must do is stop arguing with God's word. What is your leprosy? I want to tell you now, related to whatever deliverance God is going to give you for that thing that will not go away, that until you adopt, we adopt radical obedience. That's obedience to the end. Even to the point of rejecting our own perspective or that of our friends. You'll not see God. His flesh, verse 14, became like the flesh of a little child. Whoa. Okay, don't read that too fast. Wait a minute. He came to be delivered. He came up the 7th time. Not only was he delivered, but God took him all the way back to babyhood. He got delivered and restored. God reversed that thing. It took him, this is a grown man, and it took him to the day he came out of his mother's womb as a child or an infant. God is so powerful. Not only can he cure what's been a problem for years, he can take you back before it was a problem at all. That's called exceedingly abundantly above all you can ask or think. It says, he's saying, heal me. God says, I'm going to make you like a little baby. He was healed physically, but he was also healed spiritually. How do I know that? The middle of verse 15, because he says, but now I know there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Oh, now I know. Okay, my man had changed his statement. A few verses earlier, he said, I hope that his God would deliver me. But now, Elijah's God has become Naaman's God. Why does God leave you in an incurable situation? Leave me in an incurable situation? Leave us in an incurable situation so we can get around to finding out who God really is. He doesn't just want to be your buddy. He just doesn't want to be just another guy. He wants to show you when he shows out and shows off, he's in a class all by himself. Now I know that there is no other God except the God of Israel. Verse 17, if not, please let your servant at least be given 2 mules load of earth. For your servant will no longer offer burnt offerings, nor will he sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. Oh. He said, watch this. The dirt I didn't want to go down in, Jordan, I want 2 loads of it and 2 mules. Because I'm carrying this dirt back with me. Because on this dirt, I'm going to build me an altar so I can worship the only true God. I'm taking my blessing with me. Everywhere I go, I'm going to make a pile of dirt. I'm going to set up my altar and I'm going to worship God. Because guess what? When God delivers you like this, when he takes away your leprosy, when he reverses something that's been messing with you for days, months, years, and decades, and you come to see this is no joke. God is no joke. He can meet you in your deepest hole, reverse you back to a baby status. You're going to want that God every place else you go. So if you got a leprosy situation, something that won't go away. And there's another verse I want to mention in closing. Luke 4:27 says, there were many lepers in Israel. This is in the New Testament. Jesus is talking. Luke 4:27, he says, there were many lepers in Israel, but God healed none of them except Naaman. Now that's in the New Testament. Jesus is talking. He said there were many folk like Naaman in Israel, but none of those folk in Israel who are my people got healed from their leprosy except a foreigner named Naaman, because he's not a Jew. What's he saying? You can be part of the people of God and never see God work. You can come to church every week. You can be an Israelite and a leper and live the rest of your life as a leper because you refuse to do what a foreigner did. A foreigner bleeds God, tell the end, got a miracle. The folk in church worship God, got nothing because of their unbelief. We have in our community a lot of places that clean things. We have cleaners that cleans clothes. We have car washes, it cleans cars. We've got hair salon, it cleans messed up hair. We've got nail salons, it cleans messed up nails and cuticles. You come out different than you went in. Now the reason why you come out different than when you went in is when you went in, you did exactly what they asked you to do. The cleaner said, give me the clothes and turn it over to me. You turn it over to them, then you back clean clothes. You hook the car up, you drive it up to the place they tell you, they hook it up, you go and you wait, you do what they tell you to do, comes out clean. You put your nails over here, you do what they tell you to do, and you come out different. But in the church, folk come into the church dirty, hear from God what to do, and leave the same way they came in because they refused to do what the instruction manual demanded. So if you want to see God in your situation, you're going to have to put down your pride, put down your notoriety. In the kingdom of God, you got to go low in spite of your notoriety, degrees, money, position, and power. You got to humble yourself before the